Evelyn Cross stood in front of the mirror of a Park Avenue penthouse, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the edge of a marble sink so she wouldn't lose her balance. 8 months pregnant, 32 years old, and already so tired it felt like her bones were older than the city outside the window. Behind her, Manhattan glowed, yellow lights, moving cars, a skyline that promised power to those who could afford it. Tonight, her husband would stand beneath crystal chandeliers at the Plaza Hotel and talk about leadership, ethics, and family values. And Evelyn would smile beside him, because that was her job now. On the bed lay a navy blue gown, chosen not by her, but by Vanessa Cole from Julian's communications team. Soft colors, Vanessa had said earlier. The public likes soft women. Evelyn hadn't argued, she rarely did anymore. Her phone vibrated. She reached for it instinctively, but Julian's hand was faster. "Still checking messages?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "It was probably my brother," Evelyn said quietly. "Nathan just wanted to know if—" Julian turned the screen face down. "Your family makes you anxious," he replied, "and anxiety isn't good for the baby." He said it the way a doctor would, the way a man who owned the building, the car, the bank accounts, and most of her silence would. Downstairs, a black Mercedes waited. Julian slipped on his watch, adjusted his cufflinks, and glanced at her reflection. "Tonight matters," he said. "Investors, press, one wrong look, and people start asking questions." Evelyn nodded. She always nodded. As the elevator descended, her phone buzzed again in Julian's pocket. He glanced at it. Just for half a second, long enough for Evelyn to see the name on the screen. "Vanessa." Julian smiled to himself. "We'll be late," he said. "There are things we need to settle when we get back." Something in his tone made Evelyn's stomach tighten, and not because of the baby. She pressed her palm harder against her belly, whispering words only she and the child could hear. At the plaza, cameras flashed. Julian transformed instantly, his arm warm and firm around her waist. "This is my wife," he told a reporter. "She's my strength." Evelyn smiled for the world. But as they turned away, Julian leaned close and whispered, so softly no one else could hear, "Tonight is the last time you embarrass me." The ride back from the plaza was quiet in a way that made Evelyn's chest ache. Manhattan slid past the tinted windows of the Mercedes, lights smearing into long gold lines that looked almost soft, almost kind. Julian sat beside her, scrolling through emails on his phone, his face calm again, polished, as if the man who had whispered that threat minutes earlier had never existed. Evelyn watched his reflection in the glass. His jaw was relaxed, his breathing steady. That calm scared her more than his anger ever had. "You barely spoke tonight," Julian said without looking up. "I felt dizzy," she replied. "The baby." "The baby is fine," he cut in. "Dr. Harlan cleared you. You worry too much." "Dr. Harlan." The doctor Julian paid. The doctor who never asked Evelyn questions unless Julian was in the room. She turned her gaze to the city instead, one hand tightening around the fabric of her dress. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. This time, Julian didn't take it. He glanced down, saw the name, and smiled faintly. "Your brother again?" he asked. "You really should stop filling your head with their panic." "They're my family," Evelyn said, the words barely louder than a breath. Julian finally looked at her. "I am your family now." The car slowed as they turned onto Park Avenue. Their building rose ahead, all glass and steel, guarded by a doorman who straightened the moment he recognized Julian. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual, too quiet. The soft music piped in from hidden speakers did nothing to calm her nerves. Inside the penthouse, Julian loosened his tie and set his watch down on the console table with deliberate care. Evelyn slipped out of her heels, her feet aching, her back tight. She wanted to go to bed. She wanted to lie down and let the night end. Instead, Julian poured himself a drink. "You embarrassed me," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Evelyn turned slowly. "I didn't say anything wrong." "You don't need to speak to embarrass me," he replied. "People notice things. Your face, your posture, that look you get when you think you're invisible." "I was tired." "Everyone. Tired women don't get sympathy," Julian said flatly. "They get replaced." The word hung in the air between them. Replaced. Evelyn felt a familiar tightness creep into her chest. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Julian laughed softly. You're pregnant and emotional. Don't start imagining enemies. Vanessa isn't imaginary. The glass stopped moving in his hand. Julian set it down slowly and walked toward her. Not fast, not angry, just controlled. Vanessa works for me, he said. She fixes problems. You used to understand that. I used to be allowed to think, Evelyn said, her voice shaking now despite her effort to stay calm. That was when Julian's expression changed. Not rage, disappointment. You're becoming a liability, he said, and liabilities need to be managed. Evelyn took a step back, her hand instinctively covering her belly. Please, she said, let's talk tomorrow. End quote. Julian glanced at the stairs, then back at her. No, he replied, we're talking now. As he moved closer, Evelyn's phone slipped from her hand and hit the marble floor, lighting up with an incoming call from Nathan. And upstairs, unseen by either of them, the hallway security camera recorded everything until the screen suddenly went black. The first thing anyone heard was the siren. It cut through the quiet streets just before dawn, sharp and urgent, echoing between buildings that had seen everything and cared about nothing. By the time the ambulance doors slammed shut, Evelyn Cross was already unconscious, her body still, her hand curled protectively over her stomach, as if instinct alone could finish the job her strength no longer could. At the hospital, bright lights replaced darkness. Nurses moved quickly. Orders were called out. Someone asked how far along she was. Someone else asked who the father was. Julian answered every question with practiced calm, his voice steady, his hands clean, his suit still perfectly pressed. She slipped, he said. She's been under a lot of stress. The words went into the chart before anyone questioned them. In the hallway outside the ICU, Julian paced once, then stopped. He made a call. His tone was low, efficient. Not worried. Not shaken. Just annoyed. Yes, he said, an accident at home. No, nothing public. Handle it. Vanessa Cole arrived less than an hour later. Hair neat, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. She took in the scene at a glance. The doctors, the glass walls, the machines keeping Evelyn alive. Her lips pressed together, not in fear, but calculation. Is she stable? Vanessa asked. For now, Julian replied. The baby too. Vanessa exhaled, almost relieved. Good. Then we control the narrative. By mid-morning, the first statement went out. A short one. Careful words. Concerned tone. Evelyn Cross, wife of Ashford Dynamics CEO Julian Ashford, was hospitalized early this morning following a fall at home. Doctors report she is receiving excellent care. The family asks for privacy. Privacy. That word became a shield. Nathan Cross read the statement on his cracked phone screen while sitting in his truck outside a factory in Ohio. He read it twice, then a third time, his jaw tightening with each line. A fall. His sister had grown up climbing trees, jumping fences, fixing things with him and their younger brother. She didn't fall easily. Caleb saw it too. Somewhere between rides, the headline popping up on his Uber app. He pulled over, hands shaking, and called Nathan without thinking. This isn't right, Caleb said. You know that. Nathan was already packing. Back in New York, Dr. Miriam Lowe stood at the foot of Evelyn's bed, studying the monitors, the bruising that didn't match the story, the tension still locked in her patient's body. She had seen accidents. She had seen fear. This was something else. Julian noticed her silence. Is there a problem, doctor? Dr. Lowe met his eyes. We're monitoring for complications, she said carefully. Vanessa stepped in smoothly. We'll need to limit visitors. She's fragile. Julian nodded. Only immediate family. I'm sure. Vanessa smiled. Exactly. As the day wore on, calls came in. Board members. Investors. A sympathetic journalist Julian trusted. Each conversation followed the same script. Concern, stability, control. No one mentioned the missing 9 minutes of security footage. No one mentioned the phone call Julian made before dialing 911. And no one yet noticed that in a quiet corner of the hospital, a nurse paused while reviewing Evelyn's intake notes, her brow furrowing as she whispered to herself. This doesn't look like a fall at all. By noon, the story no longer belonged to the hospital. It belonged to the public. Outside Ashford Dynamics' glass tower on Fifth Avenue, cameras lined the sidewalk, reporters murmuring as they checked notes and refreshed feeds on their phones. When Julian Ashford stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit with a black tie he rarely wore, the crowd fell silent. He looked like a grieving husband, pale, controlled, respectable. "Thank you for coming," Julian began, his voice steady as microphones tilted toward him. "This morning has been difficult for my family." Behind him, the Manhattan skyline rose like a monument to success. Vanessa Cole stood just off camera, tablet tucked against her side, eyes scanning the crowd for threats. Julian continued, "My wife, Evelyn, suffered a serious fall late last night. She has been under immense emotional stress due to her pregnancy and prior mental health struggles." The words landed exactly as Vanessa intended. A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Ashford, are you saying this was a suicide attempt?" Julian paused, just long enough. "I'm saying my wife needs compassion, not speculation," he replied softly. "Doctors are doing everything they can." Inside the hospital, Dr. Miriam Lowe watched the press conference on a muted television in the staff lounge. Her jaw tightened. Mental health struggles, stress, falls. She'd seen this before. Powerful men rarely needed to lie outright. They only needed to redirect. Back in Ohio, Nathan Cross watched the same clip on his phone, his knuckles whitening around the device. His sister's name trended beneath hashtags he didn't recognize. Words like fragile, unstable, tragic. "They're burying her," he muttered. Caleb, sitting beside him at the kitchen table, nodded grimly. "They're turning her into a story she can't fight." At the hospital, Vanessa moved quickly. Visitor lists were updated. Security was tightened. A note appeared in Evelyn's file recommending limited contact due to emotional volatility. It wasn't signed by Dr. Lowe. Julian visited Evelyn once that afternoon. He stood at the foot of her bed, watching machines breathe for her. He didn't touch her. "You should have listened," he murmured, more to himself than to her. This didn't have to be messy. Outside the room, a nurse named Leela paused with a clipboard in hand. She had been on duty when Evelyn was admitted. She remembered the bruising, the way Evelyn's muscles had been rigid, defensive, the way Julian had answered questions too smoothly. Lila looked down at the intake form again. Stress-induced fall. No witness, no detailed explanation. She swallowed. Meanwhile, Vanessa met with a sympathetic columnist over coffee in a quiet midtown cafe. "Julian is exhausted," she said. "He's been protecting Evelyn for years. This pregnancy just pushed her over the edge." The columnist nodded, already typing. By evening, the narrative was set. Headlines softened Julian and hollowed Evelyn out. At sunset, 2 men arrived at the hospital from Ohio. They didn't wear suits, they didn't bring statements. They brought fear, determination, and blood ties no press release could erase. Nathan and Caleb Cross stood at the reception desk, asking for their sister. The clerk hesitated. "I'm sorry, visiting hours are restricted." Nathan leaned forward, his voice low and calm. "That's my sister. And someone is lying about how she got here." Upstairs, as Evelyn lay motionless, a small change flickered across her monitor. Almost imperceptible. A shift. A sign. And in Julian's penthouse, long after dark, Vanessa received a message from an unknown number that made her blood run cold. "We know the fall didn't happen." Nathan Cross hated hospitals. The smell of antiseptic. The way time stretched in hallways where people waited for news that could ruin them. He stood at the reception desk with his hands flat on the counter, forcing his voice to stay calm while the clerk avoided his eyes. "I understand the policy," Nathan said. "But that woman upstairs is my sister." The clerk glanced at the screen again. "I'm sorry. Mr. Ashford requested restricted access. Only his approval." "Julian Ashford doesn't get to decide who loves her," Caleb cut in. Caleb was shorter than his brother, thinner, wearing a jacket that still smelled faintly of car upholstery. He looked harmless. People always thought that. They never noticed how closely he watched everything, how his eyes kept drifting to the security cameras, the badge scanners, the rhythm of the floor. Behind them, a guard shifted uncomfortably. Nathan took a breath. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. "We just want to see her." The clerk hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "I'll check with the charge nurse." Minutes passed. The elevator dinged. Doctors moved by without looking at them. Caleb's phone buzzed. A notification. Another headline. CEO's wife battling mental health crisis, sources say. Caleb showed it to Nathan. "They're killing her while she's still breathing." At that moment, Vanessa Cole appeared at the end of the hall, heels clicking sharply against the floor. She slowed when she saw them, her expression smoothing into polite concern. "You must be the brothers," she said. "Julian mentioned you might come." Nathan turned toward her. "Then he knows we're here." Vanessa smiled. "He's under a lot of stress. We all are. Evelyn needs quiet, stability. She needs family," Caleb replied. Vanessa's eyes flicked briefly to his phone, then back to his face. "Family can be complicated," she said, "especially when emotions run high." Nathan stepped closer. "Don't talk about my sister like she's a problem." For the first time, Vanessa's smile thinned. "I'm talking about reality." The charge nurse arrived, clearing her throat. "Mr. Cross, Mr. Cross," she said, reading from her screen. "You may have 5 minutes. No photos. No recording." Vanessa's head snapped toward her. "That wasn't authorized." The nurse met her gaze evenly. "It is now." Upstairs, Evelyn lay surrounded by machines, her face pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Nathan stopped just inside the doorway, his chest tightening painfully at the sight of her. He hadn't seen her since the wedding. Since she'd started fading into someone quieter, smaller. Caleb moved closer, careful not to touch her. "Hey, Ev," he whispered. "We're here." Nathan noticed the bruises immediately. Not dramatic, not obvious, but wrong. Too symmetrical, too controlled. "This wasn't a fall," he said quietly. Behind them, Dr. Miriam Lowe stepped into the room. "I can't discuss details," she said. "But you're not wrong to ask questions." Down the hall, Vanessa pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. A message went out. Short, urgent. "They're inside. We need to move faster." In the security office, a junior technician stared at a frozen playback screen, sweat beading on his forehead. The footage from the night before ended abruptly. 9 minutes of black. He swallowed hard and reached into his desk drawer, where a small flash drive waited. And in Evelyn's room, as Nathan held her hand, her fingers twitched ever so slightly, and the heart monitor changed its rhythm. Vanessa's phone vibrated again. This time, the message read, "The footage isn't gone." The junior technician's name was Aaron Blake, and until that morning, no one at the hospital knew he existed. He sat alone in the security office, staring at the paused frame on his monitor. The timestamp blinked red in the corner. 11:42 p.m. The exact moment the hallway camera outside the Ashford penthouse should have shown something. Instead, there was only darkness. 9 minutes of nothing. Aaron wiped his palms on his jeans. He'd been told it was a routine glitch, a system reset pushed remotely. He'd signed off on it without thinking. People like Julian Ashford didn't call it orders, they called it maintenance. But now 2 men from Ohio were in the ICU. And the woman on that gurney didn't look like someone who'd slipped on a stair. Aaron opened his desk drawer and looked at the flash drive again. He hadn't deleted the footage. He'd copied it first, out of habit, out of fear. His father had always told him, never erase your way out of a problem. Down the hall, Nathan and Caleb stood with Dr. Miriam Lowe just outside Evelyn's room. Her voice was low, careful. "I can't tell you what to think," Dr. Lowe said, "but I will say this. Injuries tell stories, and sometimes the official story doesn't match the body." Caleb nodded slowly. "Who controls the cameras?" Dr. Lowe hesitated. "Building security, but requests come from higher places." Nathan clenched his jaw. "Like Julian." Dr. Lowe didn't answer. She didn't need to. Across the floor, Vanessa Cole paced near the elevators, her phone pressed tight to her ear. "I don't care how," she hissed. "Find out who let them in." She ended the call and turned just in time to see Caleb watching her. Their eyes met. Something unreadable passed between them. "You look tired," Vanessa said coolly. "This city can be overwhelming if you're not used to it." Caleb smiled faintly. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." Vanessa's phone vibrated. A new message. Her blood ran cold as she read it. "Security backup exists. Not deleted." She typed back immediately. "Who has it?" No response. In the ICU, a nurse named Lila adjusted Evelyn's IV and checked the monitor again. The numbers were stable. Better than before. "She's responding," Lila said quietly. "Small things. Fingers. Heart rate." Nathan swallowed hard. "Can she hear us?" "Sometimes." Leela replied. We don't fully understand it. Nathan leaned closer to his sister. Evelyn, he said softly. It's me. Nate. You're not alone. We're not going anywhere. Her fingers twitched again. This time, there was no doubt. At the far end of the hospital, Aaron Blake stood up from his chair. He slid the flash drive into his pocket, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. Whistleblowers didn't last long in places like this. But neither did lies. He stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Vanessa Cole. She looked at him. He looked at her. For half a second, neither spoke. Then Vanessa smiled. You work security, right? She asked pleasantly. We may need to review some footage. Aaron nodded, forcing his voice steady. Sure, he said. Which footage? Vanessa's eyes searched his face, sharp and suspicious. The night Evelyn fell, she replied. Aaron met her gaze and said the most dangerous words of his life. I was just about to ask you the same thing. Somewhere above them, unseen and unheard, the truth waited on a tiny piece of plastic. And for the first time since the sirens, Julian Ashford's perfect control began to slip. Aaron Blake didn't go back to the security office right away. He walked past it, down the corridor, through a service stairwell that smelled like dust and old paint. His heart hammered so hard he was sure someone could hear it. Every step felt louder than it should have. Every shadow looked like Vanessa Cole waiting to corner him again. The flash drive in his pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. 3 floors above, Nathan sat beside Evelyn's bed, counting her breaths the way he used to count steps when they crossed busy streets as kids. In, out, in, out. The machines beeped steadily, but his nerves refused to calm. Caleb stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what it takes, he said quietly. Find me a lawyer in New York who knows domestic violence and corporate cover-ups. He hung up and turned to Dr. Miriam Lowe. If we get proof, he asked, will it matter? Dr. Lowe hesitated. Proof always matters, she said, but who you give it to matters just as much. Downstairs, Vanessa Cole slipped into a private waiting room and locked the door behind her. She dialed Julian immediately. They know, she said the moment he answered. The brothers are inside. Someone saved the footage. Julian was silent for a beat too long. Who? I don't know yet, Vanessa said, but we need to move before it surfaces. Julian's voice hardened. Then find it. And make sure it never leaves the building. Vanessa ended the call and stared at her reflection in the darkened TV screen. She told herself this was still manageable. It always was. People panicked. She cleaned up. That was her role. She didn't notice the small red light blinking above the television. Back in the stairwell, Aaron stopped and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He pulled out his phone and opened a message thread he hadn't used in years. His older sister. A public defender in Brooklyn. I need help, he typed. I have evidence. Powerful people involved. The reply came faster than he expected. Don't talk to anyone else. Where are you? In the ICU, a nurse adjusted Evelyn's blanket. Nathan noticed something different about his sister's face. Less tension. As if her body, at least, had stopped fighting. She's stronger than they think, he murmured. Caleb nodded. So are we. The elevator doors opened down the hall, and Vanessa stepped out, her heels sharp against the floor. She scanned the area and spotted Aaron just as he turned the corner. There you are, she said smoothly. I was looking for you. Aaron forced a polite smile. Busy night. Unfortunate situation, Vanessa replied. Mr. Ashford wants a full review of last night's footage. All copies. All copies? Aaron echoed. Yes, she said, stepping closer. Including backups. Aaron met her eyes. For a moment, he saw something flicker there. Not confidence, fear. I'll need that request in writing, he said. Vanessa's smile froze. That won't be necessary. It will for me, Aaron replied, his voice steadier now. Policy. Vanessa leaned in, her voice dropping. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this. And Aaron thought of Evelyn. Of the bruises. Of 9 minutes of darkness. I think I already am, he said. Upstairs, Evelyn's monitor beeped faster, her fingers curled weakly around Nathan's. And in Aaron's pocket, the flash drive pressed against his leg like a warning, holding a truth that could destroy a city's favorite CEO. By the second night, the hospital no longer felt neutral. It felt watched. Nathan sensed it first. The way security guards lingered too long near Evelyn's room. The way nurses lowered their voices when Julian Ashford's name came up. Power had a smell, and it was everywhere. Caleb felt it too, but he focused on details instead of fear. Patterns, timing. Who walked where, and when. "They're tightening the circle," Caleb said quietly as he stood near the window, Manhattan glowing below. "Which means we're closer than they want." Nathan looked down at his sister. Her breathing was steadier now, but she still hadn't opened her eyes. "Closer to what?" "The truth," Caleb replied. "And they're about to make a mistake." Across town, Julian Ashford sat alone in his penthouse office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His phone buzzed nonstop, but he ignored it, staring instead at the city he believed he owned. He replayed the night over and over in his head, searching for cracks. He hated cracks. Vanessa stood near the door, arms folded. "Security is getting nervous," she said. "Someone copied the footage before it was wiped." "Very tant." Julian didn't turn around. "Find out who." "I'm working on it." "Work faster," he snapped. "If this leaks, I don't just lose my reputation, I lose everything." Vanessa hesitated. "There's another issue." That made him turn. "What?" "The brothers," she said. "They're not backing down, and the hospital staff is starting to ask questions." Julian's jaw tightened. "Then apply pressure." At the hospital, that pressure came quietly. A hospital administrator met with Nathan and Caleb just after midnight. His tone was polite, apologetic, dangerous. "There have been concerns about disruptions," the man said. "Given the sensitivity of Mrs. Ashford's condition, we may need to reassess visitation." Nathan leaned forward. "Are you kicking us out?" "No," the administrator said quickly. "Not yet, but cooperation would help." Caleb smiled faintly. "Cooperation with who?" The administrator didn't answer. Minutes later, Caleb's phone buzzed. An unknown number. "I have the footage. They're coming for it." Caleb's pulse spiked. He typed back immediately. "Where are you?" Before the reply came, Vanessa appeared at the end of the hall again, this time with a uniformed officer beside her. "Not NYPD. Private security." She stopped when she saw Caleb holding his phone. "Problem?" she asked sweetly. "Just family business," Caleb replied, slipping the phone into his pocket. Vanessa's gaze sharpened. "You've been very busy for someone who claims to want peace." Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Funny thing about peace, sometimes it only comes after the truth." Vanessa's smile vanished. Down in the service stairwell, Aaron Blake stood with his back against the wall, phone pressed to his ear. His sister's voice was calm, steady. "Listen to me," she said. "Do not give the drive to anyone inside that building, especially not hospital administration." "Thanks, Evan." "They're already sniffing around," Aaron whispered. "I know," she replied. "That's why you need to leave. Now." Upstairs, Evelyn's heart monitor spiked suddenly. Nathan shot to his feet. A nurse rushed in, followed by Dr. Miriam Lowe. "She's responding to voices," Dr. Lowe said. "Talk to her." Nathan leaned close. "Ev," he said urgently, "if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, unmistakably, Evelyn's fingers tightened around his. In the hallway, Vanessa's phone vibrated again. She read the message, and all the color drained from her face. "Aaron Blake has left the building." Vanessa looked up, eyes blazing. "Lock it down," she said. "Now." Because somewhere between the stairwell and the street, the truth was finally moving. And Julian Ashford was about to realize that money could stop many things, but not what had already escaped his control. By morning, the city woke up hungry. Caleb noticed it first when his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, unknown numbers, news alerts stacking on top of each other like falling dominoes. He stepped into a quiet corner of the hospital hallway and opened the first notification. Unconfirmed footage may contradict fall story in Ashford case. He exhaled slowly. "It's starting," he murmured. Nathan stood beside Evelyn's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. She was awake now, barely, her eyes fluttering open for seconds at a time before exhaustion pulled her back under. When Caleb told him the news, Nathan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. "They'll come harder now," he said. "Cornered men always do." Across town, Julian Ashford slammed his fist against his desk. The screen of his MacBook glowed with headlines, each one more dangerous than the last. Words like footage, witness, and cover-up crawled across the page. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Vanessa stood frozen near the window, her confidence finally cracking. "It's not the footage itself," she said carefully. "Not yet, just the idea of it." Julian turned on her. Ideas destroy empires faster than facts. His phone rang. A board member, then another. He ignored both and dialed a different number instead. "Shut it down," he said when the call connected. "Whatever it takes." At the hospital, Dr. Miriam Lowe met with an internal review officer, her posture stiff, her words precise. She didn't accuse, she didn't speculate. She simply requested that all records from Evelyn's admission be preserved immediately. That request alone was enough to send alarms through the administration. Meanwhile, Aaron Blake sat in the back of a crowded diner in Queens, a half-finished coffee growing cold in front of him. He watched the door constantly, the flash drive taped securely beneath the table with shaking hands. His sister sat across from him, calm as stone. "You did the right thing," she said. "People like him don't lose," Aaron replied. "They delay, they threaten, they bury." She leaned forward. "Not when the story escapes them." Back at the hospital, Vanessa arrived with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She approached Caleb first, her voice low. "You should take your sister home," she said. "Before this turns ugly." Caleb looked at her steadily. "It already did. You just didn't think anyone would survive it." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You think you're winning," she said, "but you don't understand the cost." Before Caleb could reply, a nurse rushed past them. "Dr. Lowe needs you," she said urgently. Inside Evelyn's room, the television was on. Not loud, just enough. Julian Ashford's face filled the screen as he stepped up to a microphone outside his building, jaw clenched, eyes hard. "There has been misinformation," Julian said. "My wife is ill, and I will not allow opportunists to exploit her condition." Evelyn's eyes opened fully for the first time. She looked at the screen, at Julian, at the lie. Then she turned her head toward Nathan and whispered, barely audible but unmistakably clear, "He's lying." The room went still. And somewhere across the city, a video file finished uploading. The room didn't breathe for a second after Evelyn spoke. Nathan felt it before he understood it. The shift. The weight lifting just enough to remind him that his sister was still there, still fighting. He leaned closer, his voice trembling despite himself. "Ev," he said softly, "say it again." Evelyn swallowed. Her throat was dry, her lips pale, but her eyes were clear now. Clear in a way Nathan hadn't seen in years. "He's lying," she repeated, a little stronger this time. "About everything." Caleb stood frozen near the door, his hands clenched into fists. For weeks, they had been fighting shadows, press releases, legal language, smiling faces that hid knives. And now, finally, the truth had a voice. Dr. Miriam Lowe stepped forward, her professional composure slipping just enough to reveal emotion. "Evelyn," she said gently, "do you know where you are?" "In the hospital," Evelyn replied. "Because my husband hurt me." The words landed like thunder. Outside the room, a nurse stopped walking. Another slowly turned. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a leak. This was a patient, conscious, naming her abuser. Dr. Lowe straightened. "I'm calling this in," she said. "Officially." Nathan reached for his sister's hand. Careful, reverent. "You don't have to do everything at once," he told her. "Just breathe." Evelyn nodded faintly. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. "Not of him? It's Juan." Across the city, Julian Ashford watched the same press conference replay on mute from his office. His phone buzzed repeatedly on the desk, but he didn't answer. He was already calculating, already adjusting. He told himself this was just another obstacle. Vanessa burst into the room without knocking. "The footage," she said. "It's gone public. Not all of it. Enough." Julian turned slowly. "Enough for what?" "For people to start asking questions you can't control," she replied. "And there's more." Evelyn is awake. Julian's expression hardened. "That doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Vanessa snapped. "If she talks." "She won't," Julian said coldly. "She's unstable. That's the story." Vanessa stared at him, something like doubt finally creeping into her eyes. For the first time, she wondered if she had bet on the wrong man. Back at the hospital, A police officer stood just outside Evelyn's room, speaking quietly into his radio. The hospital administrator returned, no longer polite, no longer evasive. "We'll need a formal statement," he said. "You'll get it," Dr. Lowe replied. "When she's ready." Evelyn squeezed Nathan's hand again. "I remember," she said suddenly. "The stairs, the words he said before." Caleb stepped closer. "What words?" Evelyn took a slow breath, each inhale a battle. "He said the baby made me weak, that I was ruining him." Caleb closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. Outside, reporters gathered again, sensing blood in the water. Phones were raised. Questions shouted. And deep in the city's digital bloodstream, the video file continued to spread, copied and recopied, impossible to pull back. Evelyn Cross had survived. She had spoken. And for the first time since that night at the plaza, the story was no longer Julian Ashford's to tell. By the next morning, Manhattan felt different. Not louder. Not angrier. Just alert, the way a city gets when something powerful has slipped. News vans crowded the curb outside the hospital, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers. Reporters whispered into phones, checking sources, chasing confirmations that no one wanted to give on record yet. Nathan watched it all from the window of Evelyn's room. "They're circling," he said quietly. "They should," Caleb replied. "For once, it's not us they're hunting. Thanks for watching." Inside the room, Evelyn rested with her eyes closed, exhausted but stable. Speaking had taken more out of her than she admitted. Still, her grip on reality felt firm now, anchored by the truth she had finally let out. Dr. Miriam Lowe entered with a clipboard and a look she didn't bother to soften. "Hospital administration has notified the police formally," she said. "This is no longer an internal matter." Nathan exhaled slowly. "About time? I never." Across the city, Julian Ashford sat in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The board of Ashford Dynamics appeared on a massive screen, faces tense, some angry, others afraid. "This is becoming untenable," one board member said. "Our stock dipped 6% overnight." Julian kept his hands folded, calm on the surface. "This is a family issue being exploited," he said. "I can contain it." Another voice cut in. "Can you?" Silence followed. Vanessa sat just out of frame, her tablet untouched. She hadn't slept. For the first time in years, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. At the hospital, 2 detectives arrived, plainclothes, no drama. They spoke with Dr. Lowe first, then with Nathan and Caleb. They listened, took notes, asked careful questions. "We'll need to speak with Mrs. Cross when she's able," one detective said. "She will," Nathan replied. "She's done being quiet." BC. Down the hall, a television replayed the leaked footage on loop, grainy, partial. Enough to show Julian's shadow looming, Evelyn stumbling backward, fear unmistakable in her posture. It wasn't the full truth, but it was devastating. A nurse passing by stopped and shook her head. "I knew it," she murmured. That single sentence echoed everywhere. In Queens, Aaron Blake watched the same clip on his laptop, his stomach tight. His sister stood behind him, hands on his shoulders. "You did this," she said softly. "No," Aaron replied. "She did." Back in the boardroom, a legal advisor spoke carefully. "Given the circumstances, it may be wise for Mr. Ashford to step back temporarily." Julian's eyes flashed. "I'm not stepping down." The advisor met his gaze. "Then the board may have no choice." At the hospital, Vanessa appeared one last time outside Evelyn's room. Her posture was still elegant, but her voice wavered. "This could get very ugly," she said to Caleb. "For everyone." Caleb looked at her steadily. "It already has. You just thought you'd be on the safe side of it." Vanessa swallowed. She glanced at the door, at the woman inside who had shattered the narrative with 3 words. "He's lying." As dusk settled over the city, police lights reflected off glass towers and quiet streets alike. The story had moved beyond spin, beyond control. Manhattan had chosen a side, and Julian Ashford was running out of places to hide. The official interview took place in a small, windowless room at the hospital, far from cameras and noise. 2 detectives sat across from Evelyn Cross, their posture respectful, their voices calm. A recorder rested on the table between them, its red light blinking steadily. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as Nathan sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without looking. Caleb stood near the door, arms crossed, watching everything. "Take your time," one detective said. "Start wherever you need." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her voice was quiet but steady. She didn't dramatize, she didn't exaggerate, she simply told the truth. About the control. The isolation. The nights Julian decided when she slept, when she ate, who she spoke to. About the argument after the gala. About the words he used when no one could hear them. And finally, about the moment she realized he didn't see her as a person anymore, only as a risk. When she finished, the room was silent. "That wasn't a fall," the second detective said gently. "No," Evelyn replied, "it wasn't." Across the city, the board of Ashford Dynamics convened again, this time without Julian present. Lawyers filled the room. So did fear. The leaked footage had spread overnight, picked apart frame by frame by experts and strangers alike. Then, a new email arrived. From A. Blake. Subject: Security Backup, Ashford Residence. The attachment was small. Devastating. In a diner in Queens, Aaron Blake stared at his phone as his sister squeezed his hand. "Once this goes in," she said, "there's no taking it back." Aaron nodded. Good. The footage wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It showed Julian blocking the stairwell, Evelyn backing away, his hand grabbing her arm, her body twisting, trying to protect her stomach. And then the moment she disappeared from view. 9 minutes later, Julian reappeared alone. By the time the detectives left the hospital room, the file had already been delivered to the district attorney. Julian learned about it from his lawyer. "You need to prepare yourself," the lawyer said carefully. "This is no longer a matter of public relations." Julian stood at the window of his penthouse, the city spread beneath him. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said flatly. "She pushed me." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Do not say that again. It's lost haveditum, in Mender." At the hospital, Vanessa Cole watched the news break in real time. She sat alone in a quiet corner, her tablet untouched for once. The footage played on every channel, stripped of commentary, stripped of spin. This was not a woman falling. This was a man losing control. Vanessa felt something heavy settle in her chest. She had written dozens of crisis plans. None of them covered this. In Evelyn's room, Dr. Miriam Lowe checked the monitors and smiled faintly. "Your vitals are strong," she said. "Both of you." Evelyn rested a hand over her belly. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Outside, police cars pulled up beneath glass towers. Board members resigned. Statements were rewritten. Phones rang unanswered. The truth had crossed the point of containment. And Julian Ashford's world, so carefully built on silence, began to collapse under the weight of one file that refused to disappear. Vanessa Cole realized she was alone the moment no one returned her calls. She stood in a quiet conference room on the 43rd floor of Ashford Dynamics, Manhattan spread beneath the windows like a map she no longer controlled. Her tablet lay dark on the table. No crisis plan. No talking points. Just silence. An hour earlier, she had been indispensable. Now she was invisible. Her phone finally buzzed. Not Julian. Not legal. An unknown number. "We need to talk. Today." H.B. Vanessa knew that initial. Helen Brooks. The attorney whose name had started appearing at the bottom of every article she feared. Evelyn's lawyer. At the hospital, Evelyn sat upright for the first time, pillows stacked behind her back. The effort left her exhausted, but her eyes were clear. When Helen Brooks entered the room, carrying a slim folder, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Relief. "They're circling," Helen said calmly. "Which means they're about to sacrifice someone." "And we keep Mart." Nathan crossed his arms. "Julian?" Helen shook her head. "Not first. Someone closer, someone convenient." As if summoned by the words, Vanessa walked into the hospital an hour later, escorted by no one. No confidence, no smile, just a tight jaw and eyes rimmed with red. She stopped short when she saw Evelyn sitting up. "You're awake," Vanessa said softly. Evelyn met her gaze. "I am." Vanessa swallowed. "Julian is telling people I acted without his knowledge, that I exaggerated, that I pushed the mental health angle too hard." Helen stepped forward. "Did you?" Vanessa looked between them. "Yes," she said. "But I didn't invent him. I didn't invent the way he talked about her. About the baby." Evelyn's hand tightened on the blanket. Vanessa continued, her voice cracking now. He said if the child complicated things, it would be handled. I thought he meant lawyers. I thought, she stopped. I wanted his approval. That's the truth. Silence filled the room. Helen opened the folder. We're offering you a choice, she said. Full cooperation. Documents, messages, audio, everything. In exchange, we don't bury you. Vanessa laughed weakly. You think I have leverage? You have proximity, Helen replied. And guilt? Vanessa looked at Evelyn again. For the first time, she didn't look down on her. She looked ashamed. I didn't think you'd survive, Vanessa said quietly. Evelyn held her gaze. Neither did he. Thank you for watching. That afternoon, Vanessa walked into the district attorney's office, carrying a drive of her own. Emails, draft statements, a recorded call where Julian laughed and said, if she breaks, she breaks. By evening, the headlines changed tone. CEO distances himself from advisor amid expanding probe. Inside Ashford Dynamics, board members resigned preemptively. Stock continued to slide. Julian's name was no longer followed by visionary, but by alleged. 10. At sunset, police arrived at Julian's penthouse with a warrant. From her hospital bed, Evelyn watched the news without speaking. Nathan stood beside her. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms folded. They're eating each other, Caleb said quietly. Evelyn rested a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, strong and certain. No, she said. They're just finally facing consequences. No. And somewhere downtown, as Julian Ashford stared at flashing lights through glass he once believed unbreakable, he realized too late that the woman he tried to erase had become the reason his world was ending. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. But the room was already full by 7:30. Men and women who once praised Julian Ashford's vision now avoided his eyes, whispering behind legal pads and glowing laptops. The glass walls of the Park Avenue boardroom reflected a city that had already made up its mind. Outside, the stock ticker on a nearby building bled red. Julian entered last. He looked composed, as always. Dark suit, perfect tie, the face of control. But something in his eyes had changed. The certainty was gone, replaced by calculation sharpened with fear. Let's begin, he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. This company doesn't need panic. It needs discipline. End quote. No one responded. The general counsel cleared her throat. Before we proceed, the board has voted to place you on temporary administrative leave, effective immediately. Julian's jaw tightened. On what grounds? Risk exposure, she replied. Criminal investigation. Brand collapse. Julian laughed once, sharp and humorless. You're choosing headlines over leadership. A board member leaned forward. We're choosing survival. In 40. Across town, Evelyn watched the meeting unfold on a muted television. Helen Brooks stood beside her hospital bed, arms crossed, listening to updates through an earpiece. They're cutting him loose, Helen said quietly. Exactly as expected. Nathan shook his head. After everything he did, they just remove him? For now, Helen replied. Powerful men fall in stages. Back in the boardroom, Julian stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. I built this company. End quote. And you're destroying it, another board member said. Step away, Julian. Security appeared at the door, not to arrest him, just to escort him out. As Julian walked past the table, his phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa. I gave them everything. He stopped mid-step. The room blurred. Years of manipulation, leverage, loyalty purchased and discarded, all undone by the one person he believed he controlled completely. At the hospital, Vanessa sat alone in a small interview room with detectives, her shoulders slumped, her voice hoarse. She signed her statement without hesitation. Each signature felt like cutting a cord she should have severed long ago. I know he'll blame me, she said quietly. One detective nodded. He already has. Vanessa closed her eyes. Let him. That afternoon, Julian returned to his penthouse for the last time as a free man. Drawers were empty. Accounts frozen. The silence inside the apartment felt heavier than any prison cell. He poured a drink with shaking hands. Across the city, Evelyn stood with assistance, her legs weak but steady enough to carry her to the window. She looked down at the streets far below, at the movement of life continuing without him. He always said I was nothing without him, she said softly. Caleb stood beside her. Funny how quiet he is now. Helen checked her phone, then looked up. The district attorney just approved the arrest warrant. Evelyn didn't smile. She placed a hand over her belly, feeling a slow, reassuring movement from within. Good, she said. Then it's finally over. But as police lights began to flash outside the penthouse below, Julian Ashford made one last call, one that would prove he still hadn't learned the most important lesson of all. And when Evelyn's phone rang moments later, an unfamiliar number lighting the screen, she knew the storm wasn't finished yet. Evelyn stared at the phone as it vibrated again on the tray beside her bed. Unknown number, Manhattan area code. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the past had found a way to slip through the cracks. Nathan reached for it instinctively. Don't, Evelyn said softly. I want to hear him. She answered and put it on speaker. Evelyn, Julian's voice said, low and controlled, like it used to be. We need to talk. Caleb's shoulders stiffened. Helen Brooks lifted a hand, signaling silence, already recording. You shouldn't be calling me, Evelyn replied. I shouldn't be a lot of things right now, Julian said. But here we are. Outside the hospital window, sirens wailed faintly. Julian exhaled, then continued. You don't understand what you're doing. These people, your lawyer, your brothers, they'll destroy everything. There's still time to stop this. Evelyn closed her eyes. For years, that tone had worked. Calm. Reasonable. Framing his control as protection. Stop what? She asked. The statement, Julian said. The cooperation. We can say this was a misunderstanding. Stress. Pregnancy. I'll take care of you. Of the baby. Nathan's jaw clenched. Caleb shook his head slowly, disbelief written across his face. You already tried to take care of me, Evelyn said. That's why I'm here. Julian's breath hitched, just barely. You're being influenced. I'm being honest. Silence stretched between them. When Julian spoke again, the mask slipped. You think the world will side with you? He said. I built this city's trust. I funded their hospitals, their campaigns. You think one woman changes that? Yes, Evelyn said quietly. I do. Julian laughed, sharp and bitter. Then let me make this simple. Withdraw your statement, and I won't contest custody. The room went still. Helen's eyes hardened. Nathan took a step forward, then stopped himself. You don't get to bargain with my child, Evelyn said, her voice steady. You don't get to say his name. Julian's tone turned cold. Be careful. Evelyn leaned back against the pillows, one hand resting over her belly. I am. For the first time, there was a knock at the door. A police officer stood just outside, speaking quietly to hospital security. Helen checked her phone, then met Evelyn's gaze and nodded once. Julian, Evelyn said, they're coming for you. Another pause. Longer this time. You did this, Julian said, the control finally cracking. No, she replied. You did. The line went dead. Across the city, Julian Ashford stood in his darkened penthouse as red and blue lights painted the walls. He looked at his phone, then at the door, as if considering one last move. Somewhere deep down, he still believed he could talk his way out. At the hospital, Evelyn exhaled, her body trembling as the adrenaline faded. Nathan took her hand. Caleb stood watch by the door. Helen pressed stop on the recording. That call helps us, Helen said. A lot. Evelyn nodded, tears finally slipping free not from fear, but from release. And as the city braced itself for what would come next, one truth settled quietly in the room. Julian had just sealed his own fate. Because the moment he tried to negotiate a child's future, he crossed a line no power could erase. The knock came at exactly 9:17 p.m. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The kind of knock delivered by people who already knew you had nowhere to go. Julian Ashford stood frozen in the center of his penthouse living room, the city lights of Manhattan flickering against the glass behind him. For the first time in his life, the silence didn't feel obedient. It felt judgmental. Another knock. He straightened his jacket out of habit, as if appearance still mattered, as if power could be buttoned back into place. When he opened the door, two detectives stood there, badges visible, faces unreadable. A uniformed officer waited just behind them. Julian Ashford, one detective said. You're under arrest for felony assault, coercion, and witness intimidation. Julian's lips parted, then closed again. "This is unnecessary," he said. "My attorney." "You can call him," the detective replied calmly. "After we leave." They stepped inside. Cold steel clicked around Julian's wrists, the sound impossibly loud in the expensive, empty room. For a brief second, panic flashed across his face before he forced it back down. Cameras waited outside. By the time Julian was led through the lobby, flashes exploded like fireworks. Someone shouted his name. Someone else shouted a question he didn't answer. Across the city, Evelyn watched the arrest on television from her hospital bed. She didn't feel joy. She felt still. Nathan stood behind her, hands resting on the back of her chair. "It's done," he said quietly. "No," Evelyn replied. "It's begun," he said. At the precinct, Julian sat in a holding room, his tie removed, his confidence stripped down to raw calculation. He stared at the table, replaying mistakes. The call. The threats. Vanessa's betrayal. Across the hall, detectives reviewed recordings, footage, transcripts. Each piece fit too well to ignore. "This isn't just domestic violence," one detective said. "This is a pattern." Back at the hospital, Helen Brooks closed her laptop and exhaled. "The DA is pressing full charges," she said. "And they're requesting a protective order immediately." Evelyn nodded. "For my son." "For both of you," Helen corrected gently. Later that night, a nurse wheeled Evelyn to a quieter wing. The chaos had settled, replaced by something unfamiliar, peace edged with exhaustion. Caleb walked alongside her, silent but steady. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn thought for a moment. "I'm not afraid," she said. "That feels new, doesn't Tanda?" In a downtown jail, Julian Ashford lay awake on a narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. No glass walls, no skyline, no assistants waiting outside the door, just concrete and fluorescent light. For the first time, no one listened when he spoke. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Ashford arrested in domestic assault case. CEO denied bail pending hearing. At the hospital, Dr. Miriam Lowe checked Evelyn's vitals and smiled. "You're strong," she said. "Both of you." "Danar." Evelyn rested a hand over her belly. The baby kicked gently, as if agreeing. She looked out the window at a city that had finally stopped protecting the wrong man. Julian had spent his life believing consequences were for other people. Now, sitting alone behind locked doors, he was forced to confront the truth he had avoided for too long. Power doesn't disappear quietly. It collapses. And when it does, it leaves nothing behind to hide in. The arraignment happened 2 days later, and the city showed up for it. Nathan saw it on the news, first crowds packed outside the courthouse, phones raised, reporters shouting Julian Ashford's name as if it were a verdict by itself. The man who once moved through Manhattan like it belonged to him now entered through a side door, flanked by officers, his hands cuffed in front of him. Evelyn watched from her hospital room, wrapped in a blanket, the television volume low. She didn't look away. Julian looked smaller on the screen. Not weak, just exposed. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, eyes darting in a way that betrayed how little control he had left. For the first time, he wasn't directing the narrative. He was trapped inside it. "The judge has denied bail," the anchor said, citing risk of witness intimidation. Caleb let out a slow breath. "That's it," he said. "No more calls, no more pressure. If you can," said Over Resner. Evelyn nodded, though part of her still felt like she was holding her breath. Trauma didn't disappear just because handcuffs appeared. Inside the courtroom, Julian's attorney argued forcefully, pointing to his record, his philanthropy, his lack of prior convictions. The judge listened, then looked down at the file in front of him. "This court takes allegations of domestic violence seriously," the judge said evenly, "especially when supported by video evidence and recorded communications." "Interesting." Julian didn't react. But something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, sharp and unfamiliar. In the gallery, Vanessa Cole sat 2 rows back, arms folded, face pale. She avoided looking at him. She knew better now. Loyalty had an expiration date, and she had already passed hers. At the hospital, Dr. Miriam Lowe checked Evelyn's blood pressure and smiled. "You're doing remarkably well," she said. "Considering everything." Evelyn managed a small smile. "I think my body finally knows it's safe. It's 4. That afternoon, Helen Brooks arrived with a stack of papers. "Protective orders are in place," she said. Full custody proceedings will begin after the birth, but given the circumstances, he won't touch my child, Evelyn said firmly. No, Helen agreed. He won't. In jail, Julian Ashford sat alone during recreation, the noise around him dull and distant. Other inmates recognized him now, not with respect, with curiosity, with hunger. Power didn't mean much here. He replayed the night again, searching for the moment he could have stopped himself. The moment things tipped, but control had always felt like instinct to him. He had never learned where it ended. Back in Manhattan, Ashford Dynamics announced an interim CEO. Donations were quietly redirected. Buildings removed his name overnight. A city erasing a man it once celebrated. That evening, Evelyn stood with Help beside the window, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Nathan stood close, steady as ever. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp but calm. "Do you regret it?" Nathan asked gently. Evelyn shook her head. "I regret staying silent," she said, not speaking. She felt the baby move, strong and deliberate, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine a future not shaped by fear. On the news, the anchor spoke again. "Ashford's next hearing is scheduled for next month. Prosecutors say this is only the beginning." And for it, Evelyn turned off the television. She didn't need to watch him fall anymore. She was already rising. Labor began just before sunrise. Evelyn woke to a deep, tightening pain that stole the air from her lungs and replaced it with something raw and unstoppable. For a moment, panic flickered through her chest. Then she breathed. Slow, measured. This pain was different. This pain was not violence. It was life demanding its way forward. Nathan was awake instantly. Caleb followed seconds later, already pressing the call button. "It's time," Evelyn whispered, one hand gripping the sheet, the other instinctively moving to her belly. Her voice shook, but there was no fear in it now. Nurses filled the room. Dr. Miriam Lowe arrived calm and focused, her presence grounding. Orders were given. Monitors beeped faster. The city outside the window faded into background noise as Evelyn was wheeled down the hallway, the ceiling lights blurring overhead. In the delivery room, time fractured. Pain came in waves, fierce and consuming, then receded just enough for Evelyn to catch her breath. She screamed once, then laughed weakly through tears. "I can do this," she said aloud, as much to herself as to anyone else. "Yes, you can," Dr. Lowe replied firmly. Nathan stood near her head, his face pale but steady. Caleb paced near the wall, hands clenched, eyes never leaving his sister. Between contractions, Evelyn's mind wandered in strange flashes. The penthouse, the gala lights, Julian's voice. Then those images shattered, replaced by something stronger. Her brothers, the hospital room. The moment she spoke, this was not the end of her story. This was the beginning. Hours later, when her body felt like it had nothing left to give, a cry cut through the room. Sharp. Alive. Real. "There he is," Dr. Lowe said with a smile that reached her eyes. The nurse placed the baby on Evelyn's chest, warm and squirming, his tiny fists clenched like he was already fighting for his place in the world. Evelyn broke down completely then, sobbing as she wrapped her arms around him. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm your mom." Nathan turned away, wiping his eyes. Caleb let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside the delivery room, the world kept spinning. News updates scrolled, legal filings moved forward. Julian Ashford remained in custody, his name still dominating headlines. But inside that room, none of it mattered. Later, when the room was quiet and the baby slept against her chest, Evelyn stared down at his face. He was perfect, not because he was flawless, but because he was hers. Helen Brooks arrived softly, careful not to disturb them. "Both of you are doing well," she said with a gentle smile. "That matters more than any court date." Evelyn nodded. "I didn't think I'd get this," she said quietly. "Peace." Helen met her gaze. "You earned it." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Evelyn stood at the window with Help, holding her son close. The city glowed below, indifferent and beautiful. She didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like a mother. And somewhere far away, behind locked doors and concrete walls, Julian Ashford sat alone, learning too late that the life he tried to control had moved on without him. Evelyn pressed a kiss to her son's forehead. The cycle was broken. The future had arrived. The weeks after the birth moved quietly, but the consequences moved fast. Julian Ashford's case dominated every financial and legal channel. What began as a domestic violence charge widened into something much larger. Prosecutors followed the trail, the footage exposed, and it led them to places Julian had always believed were untouchable. Altered records, coerced silence. Money used to smooth over truth. Each day brought another headline. Former CEO faces additional charges. Ashford Dynamics, under federal review. Board members testify in expanding case. Evelyn read none of them. She spent her days in a small, sunlit room at the hospital's recovery wing, learning the rhythm of her son's breathing, memorizing the weight of him in her arms. The world outside felt distant now, like something she had already survived. Nathan watched from a chair near the window, scrolling through updates he didn't share unless she asked. Caleb handled the rest: calls, logistics, arrangements, his usual quiet focus sharpened by purpose. One afternoon, Helen Brooks arrived with a final stack of documents. She set them down carefully, as if not to disturb the peace in the room. "It's done," she said. Evelyn looked up. "All of it?" Helen nodded. "Full protective orders, sole custody. His parental rights are suspended pending trial. And the civil suits." She paused. "They're overwhelming." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the blanket. "What happens to him?" Helen didn't soften her voice. "He will answer for everything he did." Publicly, slowly. Across the river, Julian Ashford sat in a holding room, thinner now, his confidence worn down by fluorescent lights and endless questioning. He watched the same footage played back again and again, each time stripping him of another excuse. No spin, no reframe, just him. When the judge denied his latest motion, Julian finally understood something he never had before. Consequences didn't care who you used to be. At Ashford Dynamics, his name was removed from everything. Buildings, foundations, plaques. Even the lobby wall where his portrait once hung stood blank now, like he had never existed. Vanessa Cole was barred from consulting work indefinitely. She avoided the spotlight, knowing public forgiveness wasn't something she deserved. She had told the truth, yes, but only after helping bury it. Back at the hospital, Evelyn signed the last form Helen placed in front of her. She didn't rush, she didn't shake. "That's it," Helen said softly. "You're free." Evelyn leaned back and closed her eyes. Not in relief, in understanding. Freedom wasn't the absence of pain. It was the absence of fear. That evening, she walked slowly through Central Park with her brothers, her son bundled against her chest. The city moved around them. Runners, dogs, laughter, life continuing without pause. No one recognized her. And for the first time, that felt like a gift. Caleb glanced at her. "You okay?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm better than okay." She looked down at her son, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. Julian Ashford would spend years paying for what he had done. In courtrooms, in cells, in the long silence that followed power. But Evelyn's victory wasn't watching him fall. It was walking forward without looking back. The city had taken notice of the truth. Now, it was finally letting her live. Spring came quietly that year. Not with headlines or sirens, but with small, ordinary moments that felt almost unreal after everything Evelyn Cross had survived. Morning light through thin curtains. The soft weight of her son sleeping against her chest. Coffee cooling on the kitchen counter because she forgot it was there. She no longer lived in Manhattan. The apartment was modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood outside the city, close enough for work but far enough from glass towers and memories. The walls were bare for now. No art, no statements, just space to breathe. Nathan helped fix the loose cabinet door that Julian once promised to replace and never did. Caleb assembled the crib, muttering under his breath while following instructions that made no sense. They argued. They laughed. They stayed. Evelyn watched them from the couch, her son cradled in her arms, and felt something settle inside her chest. This was what safety felt like. The trial moved forward without her presence. Helen Brooks handled everything, sending updates when necessary, never pushing. Julian Ashford's name still appeared in the news, but now it was followed by words like sentencing and liability. The city that once shielded him no longer looked his way. Evelyn didn't celebrate. She healed. Some afternoons, when the baby slept, she read. Real books, not self-help manuals meant to make her quieter or easier to manage. Stories about women who lost everything and still found meaning. She marked pages. She underlined sentences that felt like truths she'd always known but had never been allowed to say out loud. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room gold, Evelyn stood at the window, rocking her son gently. He blinked up at her, eyes curious, trusting. "I won't lie to you," she whispered. "I won't make you smaller to make myself safer." He yawned, unimpressed, and Evelyn laughed softly. Later that week, she met someone new. Not a savior. Not a powerful man with promises. Just a neighbor, kind and awkward, who offered to carry groceries when he saw her struggling with the stroller. He didn't ask questions. He didn't recognize her. He didn't need to. They talked about weather, about sleep deprivation, about nothing important, and that was enough. Months later, the final verdict came down. Guilty on all major charges. Sentencing scheduled. Appeals denied. Helen called Evelyn personally. "It's over," she said. Evelyn closed her eyes. Not in relief, in gratitude. That night, she held her son close and let herself cry, not from pain, but from release, from knowing the cycle had ended with her. Julian Ashford lost his freedom, his legacy, and the name he once used to control rooms. He would spend years answering for what he had done, far from the world that once applauded him. Evelyn gained something far more rare. She gained her voice. She gained her family. She gained mornings without fear and nights without dread. And as her son grew, learning her face, her voice, her laugh, she understood the truth that no court could deliver. Justice wasn't watching a powerful man fall. Justice was standing in a quiet room, holding the life you protected, knowing you were finally free. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, really still here, then maybe something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet way. Stories like this don't stay on the screen. They follow us into our own lives, into the moments when we feel small, trapped, or afraid to speak. What this story reminds us is simple but powerful. Silence protects pain, not peace. Real strength isn't found in control, money, or image. It's found in truth, in choosing to stand up even when your voice shakes. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Healing begins the moment we stop trying to survive who we were forced to be and start honoring who we truly are. Another Stoic truth says, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Pain doesn't disappear by pretending it never happened. It becomes the path that teaches us boundaries, self-respect, and compassion for ourselves and others. Like Evelyn, we don't heal by winning revenge, we heal by reclaiming our lives. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that you are not alone, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, awaken, and remind us of our worth.